Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of Reflections. I am your host, Deontay Brewer. Today we will be talking about the wisdom of elders. The elderly has always been very special to me. They held a special place in my heart, and I hope after viewing this episode, they will also hold a special place in your heart as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Hi, I'll start off with this Central African proverb from the Natumbo people. It states, "A youth that does not cultivate friendship with the elderly is like a tree without roots." I find that proverb to be very profound because a tree, it grows. It has to have roots in order to grow and to provide fruit and shade. It's just necessary for that tree's vitamin and growth. And so, therefore, I'd like to liken that to the elderly and mankind's relationship with the elderly. If we don't have the wisdom of our elders, it would also be hard for mankind to grow and continue to evolve as people. In this show today, I just want to talk about how the elderly population, they're important. They're very important and they're needed. A relationship with them is needed in today's society. In my reading, I've come across different populations that have relationships with the elderly. The Asian population or community, should I say, have always revered the elderly, as well as the African population. Their elders hold a special place in their heart, as the elders live with the family and have certain roles that they fulfill within the family. Within those populations or communities, the elders are a source of strength, and family members go to those elders for advice, and they have a special place in their hearts, and they're revered and respected, and there's no disrespect. Children aren't allowed to disrespect the elders. They wouldn't think of doing it because they realize the importance of that family member as an elder. And so for me, I have also revered, as long as I can remember, the elderly, whether it was my family members or, people that I worked with. And I want to say in America, at one time, the elderly had a special place, in American society. I know at one time, they would live with their family members as well, when they would help out with the household chores, and they were also a source of strength, to their family members, just as they are in the Asian culture and then the African cultures. But over time, there's been a stigma that's been attached to the elderly. You can see it even, in movies and on television. Once people, reach a certain age, they're not as useful anymore. People, you would say casting directors and, think that people, lose their vitality. And so, they're not appealing, visually. And so, there's been a lack of respect, for the elderly. And, when they reach a certain age, they're told they need to retire, they're no longer useful to the workforce. And it's just, that's unfair, that's discrimination. And, I just feel that, as people age, most, you don't have to have even high education, but just what you've been taught in life, the wisdom that you've gained, you can pass that on, to a young person. And if that young person is wise enough, they'll take heed to what the elderly person is saying, and they'll use it, in their daily life. I think about when I started working, one of my first jobs was at a nursing home here in Fort Wayne, and I worked in activities, and my job was to shuttle the residents, back and forth to the activities that our nursing home provided. And I mean, the activities were very fun. We took them on outings to the zoo, and we had music programs within the nursing home. But it was those moments I talked with the residents and got to know them. Those are the moments that I treasure and remember the most. Those, whether it was a war veteran that was telling me how life was, in America during the war, or a housewife that had, grown up during the Depression and was raising children, post-Depression, and how life was for her. I mean, it was just very, very, it was vivid, and just to hear those words of wisdom, and the resiliency that came from those residents was very much vital to me. And at that time, I was studying history in college. And so what I was learning in history class, about the war, about the Great Depression, I had living history, in the form of those residents that was sharing those stories, to me. And just what they taught me and what I observed and listen, it has carried me through life, in good times and in bad times. The elderly, their stories can teach you, and show you and tell you a lot. Their stories can be a roadmap, and if you're wise enough to listen and apply it to your life. I think of members in my own family that were part of the Great Migration. And the Great Migration, there were two different waves, but this last Great Migration occurred, it was like in the early part of the 20th century. I'd say like the 1920s and 30s through like the 50s, 1950s and 60s. Black Americans were coming up from down south, places like Alabama and Mississippi, and they were settling into cities up north, Chicago and Detroit, and, my family, for example, Indiana. And they, had such a life, a lot of them were sharecroppers down south. And, they were experiencing Jim Crow, discrimination, which was, blacks were treated as second-class citizens in all forms of life, whether it was housing and education, so my family members left that life down south and settled here up north. And just the stories, that they told, my grandparents, working, on, a white man's land and picking cotton and having to care for, children, small children, and just working out in the fields and not being able to go to school, like other children over the world because they had to work. It was a huge responsibility for a child and young person, to undertake. And then, as they became adults, late teenagers and early adults, migrating up north, to a city that was foreign to them, when life being much better, just those stories of resiliency and faith. For my family, faith certainly had a role to play, their belief, in God and living for God and trusting God got them through a lot of hard times, whether it was the death of other family members and, it just, their faith kept them strong day to day. And so, for my family member, if that could happen within my family member, that could happen, to my viewers in your family, find an elderly person within your family, a grandmother, or a great grandmother, or a grandfather, and just sit, and ask them about their life. And you'd be surprised. They'd have a lot to share with you. When, a lot of times we think that the elderly, are out of touch with today's society. Oh, they're old. What do they know? But a lot of things, or should I say themes in life. They experienced it. They just experienced it during a different time. They, fell in love with people. They had relationships. They worked. They raised families. A lot of those same themes, today they experienced, 50 and 60 and 70 years ago, when their advice, could get you through, raising children today, or being married today, or, working today, issues that you may have. We should not just discount them because they're elderly, because they have a lot, to teach and to share. And I think of my great aunt that was very special to me. I have a lot of family members that are elderly, and some of them I go to, and they regale me with stories of the past, and we bond over that. But I have one great aunt that was very, very special to me, and I can remember visiting her. I was in my early 20s, and my favorite thing to do would be it'd usually be in the spring and or summer of the year, and I would go over and visit her, and we'd sit on her back porch, and she would tell me stories, of growing up in Alabama. That's a lot of my family is from the country in Alabama, and she would also, have, refreshments, food and something to drink for me at her house. And she was such a good cook. And so I looked forward to going over and, eating with her. And she would tell me those stories. And she knew, when something was bothering me, when her home was just a welcome place for me, to come and sit and grab that wisdom, listen for that wisdom, and I would, whether it was something going on at my job or in school, she had, her own homespun wisdom that would help me get through, that situation, whatever that situation was. And this was a lady that was 50 years older than me, and, we would always, she would tie in, our faith, and how, God, would help me get through the situation as he had helped her get through, situations in her life. And so I think of my aunt, she's been deceased now for a few years, but, anytime, I, have a situation that I'm facing, and, I feel discouraged, I think of my aunt and those conversations that we had, all those years ago, and faith, being the center and the theme of those conversations. And I think of her resiliency and how she lived, and she faced tragedy in her life, but she, her faith was the overriding theme that got her through. And so I always say to myself, if she got through those situations, I certainly can get through any situation. And so I encourage you, viewers, you adults, that have children, to take them around, the elderly in your family, and have them sit, and visit and talk to the elderly, when they can learn something. My viewers, you can learn something from someone in your family that's elderly. Don't overlook them. Don't, disregard them or use them. I know a lot of people sometimes use the elderly to babysit and watch children while they go and do other things, Certainly they can help out, with children, but, let them be a guide, and a source of strength, for you, because they have so much wisdom to share. And the wisdom that they have to share, it applies to today as well. When, or, you can connect with technology, if there's someone in your family, that's elderly, and you're a young person, you can show them how to send a text message or, do something online, to keep the connection strong, FaceTiming or whatever, to keep that connection, strong and vital, because we need the elderly. We need their advice. And I think that, in today's society, technology is so, expansive, and, information is everywhere. And if you want to know something, most people go online, and look it up. But sometimes it's that just face-to-face, interaction with someone, if you're a young girl and you're starting out cooking, you can go to an aunt, an elderly aunt, and ask, how do you make this? You make this dish, and everybody in the holidays, love this dish, or if you're a young boy, and you want to learn how to, do wood carving or cutting grass or something, you can go to a grandfather that's done that type of work. That'll be a way of bonding or connecting, is what I'm trying to say. So cultivate those relationships. I am very blessed to still have my maternal grandparents and my paternal grandfather still living, and I still bond with my grandparents, and today, I lived with my maternal grandparents after college, for so many, or after high school, I'm sorry. I lived with them for so many years, and, we went to church together and out to eat together. And, I sat and listened to their stories, the hardship growing up down south. And, then after they moved to Fort Wayne, and, they, told me how Fort Wayne was in the 60s and 70s, and, before I was born, and, the change that, they witnessed, from being down south in the Jim Crow era to, the civil rights movement here in Fort Wayne. And then my grandparents, all three of them lived to see, the first black president, President Barack Obama, when he was, inaugurated. They lived to see that, and, they never thought they'd see that. And so that was something we all shared together, and so, I'm very thankful, for my connections, with my grandparents. And, so I encourage, my viewers, whether you're young or old, to develop, a relationship, with the elderly in your family. And you may not have many elderly people in your family. You could develop a relationship with a colleague that's older, or a neighbor. I had an elderly neighbor down the street from my grandparents that I visited with. And this lady was born at the beginning of the 20th century. And I mean, just the story she told me, of growing up down south. She is, again, she lived down south as well, like my grandparents, and, raised children and down there, and then moved, here to Fort Wayne. And, life was a little different here. She didn't have to work as hard, as she did down south, but those stories, and sometimes, I can remember going to one of the restaurants here, and I would get myself a dinner, and I would get her a dinner, and we would sit on that porch and just laugh and talk. And she called me her step-grandchild. She said I was her step-grandchild. She told me I visited her more than her grandchildren. And so just the memories that I have, and I can remember her telling me, well, before I say that, this lady was very noteworthy, because she was the one that told me about Access Fort Wayne. And my show Reflections is shown via Access Fort Wayne. I was sitting at her home one day, and we saw an Access production on television. She told me that she was a fan of Access and she watched it on TV. But secondly, I would go to her, about different things, day-to-day things. And I'll never forget, she told me that people talked about Jesus. She said, so what make you think they're not going to talk about you? When she called me her boy. And so I miss her, and I miss my great aunt, and so many of the elderly people that I helped take care of at that nursing home that I worked at. Their resiliency that they displayed in their life, has been a testament to me. And as I continue to, age, I understand a lot of the things that they told me, how faith, and hope and trust in God, it'll get you through life's situations. And just to be strong, I could hear them say, you're going to make it, be strong. I think back, on those conversations and those old sayings of theirs, and certainly that those things have gotten me through, those trying times in my life. And so if it can be done for me, it can be done for you, my viewers. So again, as I've stated, find an elderly person, as a mentor, if it's not in your family, outside of your family, and sit and learn, those vital life lessons that can get you through certain situations more than now like never before. We need the elderly, because the country is so divided, and it's so much uncertainty going on today. I look forward to those elderly people I have left in my life, to let me know that everything is going to be okay and that the world will make it. When I think of my grandmother, who says God has a whole world in his hands, therefore everything's going to be okay. She also tells me, what's for you was for you. That's what my grandmother says. And so I'm thankful. I wouldn't be the person I am today, partly, I know it's because of God, and it's because of my relationships with those elderly people that I have. And so I'd like to read this quote again. It says, a youth that does not cultivate friendship with the elderly is like a tree without roots. Don't be like a tree, without roots, because you won't grow and flourish. Cultivate that relationship, with the elderly, and watch how beneficial your life will become. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing.